Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the Godspeed Garage. Today, a very special how-to episode. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, the description said 73 to 87 Chevy C-10 pickup truck. And this is obviously not a 70s or 80s square body pickup truck. This is my 58 Chevy. Now, if you've seen the story behind this video, I'll put a link to it up here. You will know that this is actually sitting on a 75 Chevy C-10 chassis. That was the donor truck I got for this truck, so I can have disc brakes, independent suspension, and all of that stuff. At this point, it's about 40-something years old, and the bushings and ball joints, the whole front end are completely worn out, so it's way overdue for replacing. Now I'm going to be installing this kit I got from Energy Suspension. This kit is the bushings for the upper and lower control arms for the front end of these square body pickups. I also got some MOOG upper and lower ball joints. I'm going to replace those too while I'm at it, and hopefully it'll be pretty simple. We'll see. Alright, so once you got the wheel off, first thing to do is start taking stuff apart. I'm going to start with this brake caliper right here. What I did first, since this has been probably not touched in its 40-some years of existence, I soaked all of these nuts I'm going to remove with penetrant fluid and just kind of let it soak. You're going to remove all of these nuts. So there's those two there. These ones on the end here for the upper control arm. I'm going to remove the shock too, since that's connected to the lower control arm. And you're going to have to remove the tie rod end here, and those nuts right there for the lower control arm on both sides. And here's the sway bar. Obviously you got to remove that as well. And then the spindle is going to come out. There's two nuts for the spindle, one on top, I don't know if you can see that, and one down here on the bottom. So you got to remove the cotter pin because those are king nuts. Take the cotter pin out and then the nut will come off. But first thing to go is the caliper. And these bolts on the caliper are an Allen bolt. Alright, the brake caliper is off. A little tip trick. When you take these bolts out, once you got it out, so they don't walk off, put them back in the holes for storage. I can't tell you how many screws and nuts I've lost because I set them down on the ground, or I put them in a tray or a bucket somewhere, and who knows where they went. So those are specialty bolts for the caliper, so make sure you put them back in there. Secondly, we're going to hang that up. I see a lot of guys dangling these, and if they come crashing down, you're going to damage your brake lines. Use a zip tie and just hang it up somewhere out of the way. Now that that's up and out of the way, the next step is to remove the spindle. So we're going to remove these king nuts and the cotter pins to get the spindle out. The rotor and everything, you don't need to take that apart. It'll all come off as one piece. A good idea though to put a jack up underneath the lower control arm just to hold it up so it doesn't come crashing down on your legs or the ground or whatever. I got the lower control arm off, and there's the spindle over there. The lower control arm, since we left off on the video, these brackets right here, there's one on this side and one on this side over here. So there's U-bolts that go in there, and that's what holds that bar for the lower control arm on. You'll have to remove those to get the whole lower control arm off. One quick note is to make sure you get the nuts on the end of the bar that has the bushings for the lower control arm. Take those off before you remove these U-bolts, because you got to have an impact gun to get those off. I suppose you could do it with a wrench and a long cheater bar, but it's much easier to get those nuts off when the control arm is actually on the vehicle than to try to take them off with it just sitting on the ground. So same thing here on the upper control arm, that nut there and this nut over here. Make sure you get those off while they're on the vehicle before you take them off. One other thing that I didn't get on film yesterday, the ball joint for the lower control arm, this is the upper, the lower control arm, it's pressed in there, and you have to press it out from the top to the bottom, which makes sense if you think about it, because everything is bolted tight with the spindle, and so the lower control arm one, once you put the king nut on top and tighten it down, it pulls the ball joint up. So you got to press it from the top down for the lower control arm. The upper ball joint on the upper control arm up here, it's got these rivets. You'll just grind those off and punch them out, and the new kit will come with its own bolts and nuts, so that'll be bolted in, so those rivets are going to go. So all that's left for me now is to remove this upper control arm, which we'll disconnect that bolt for our brake line, and we'll do these two nuts on either end here. Take those off using my impact, and then finally that's your camber adjustment right there. So those nuts that are holding that on will come off last. Okay, I got this all cleaned up in the parts washer, got most of the grease off of it, and next step is to take off this upper ball joint. And what I've seen a lot of people do is use an air chisel to knock these heads off of these rivets, but that hasn't always worked for me. And so what I normally have ended up doing is taking a grinder and just grinding these heads off and then punching them through. But let's try it with the air chisel. Might have to knock off both sides, this one and the bottom side too. Next step is to get these old rubber bushings out. You can see how nasty they are. My truck was vibrating like crazy. What I've seen a lot of people do is light these on fire and burn them out. But I tried that on the other control arm and I couldn't get it to work. It wouldn't stay lit. Maybe it was because it was windy. The smoke is nasty, first of all. It's not good for you. It took a lot more work to burn them out. I think I came up with a better idea. Getting the other bushings out, I ended up chiseling off this big chunk here and then drilling the rubber bushing out and then chipping it out with a screwdriver and just keep working it until the whole thing comes out. That seemed to work better than using the fire method. So I suppose too you could actually use a hole saw, and I actually thought about that. I've got a hole saw here to do that. What I'm worried about though is this hole saw getting all gunked up because it generates a lot of heat. Not that the drill bit doesn't, but it'll melt the rubber and it'll just become a gelatinous goo that you can't really get off of there. So I think I'm going to stick with the drill method. Start over.